I'm Natalie Parker, 34, and I built a tech empire from nothing but determination and spite. Growing up as the poor relation at my wealthy uncle's annual family gatherings taught me humiliation comes in designer packaging. Every summer, I'd return to that mansion, swallowing pride with champagne I couldn't afford. This year would be different. After a decade of their sidelong glances and backhanded compliments, I had a surprise that would land with the subtlety of the Bell 429 helicopter I now piloted. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and buckle up. This revenge story has a vertical takeoff. My childhood in South Boston was worlds away from the pristine suburbs where my Uncle James and his family resided. Our 3-bedroom apartment above a convenience store felt cavernous to me until I was 7 years old, the first time I visited Uncle James's estate in Brookline. That day changed how I saw everything. My father worked as a mechanic at a local garage, his hands perpetually stained with grease no amount of scrubbing could remove. He'd come home exhausted, but would still find energy to swing me around the living room or help with my science projects. Mom was a secretary at the elementary school I attended, which meant I couldn't get away with anything the other kids could. Between their salaries, we lived comfortably enough, bills paid, food on the table, occasional trips to the movies on discount Tuesdays. Uncle James, my father's older brother, had a different life entirely. He'd started in real estate during the boom and expanded into various investments I wouldn't understand until much later. His Tudor-style mansion sat on 4 acres with manicured gardens, an indoor pool, and a wine cellar larger than our entire apartment. My Aunt Diane, with her perfect blonde highlights and tennis instructor physique, always greeted us with air kisses and comments about how refreshingly simple our lives must be. Their children, my cousins Brittany and Tyler, became the measuring sticks against which I constantly fell short. Brittany, 3 years older, had her own horse by age 10 and spent summers in Europe. Tyler, just a year older than me, had every gaming system available and a closet full of clothes with tags I'd only seen in magazines. The first family gathering I clearly remember was my uncle's 40th birthday celebration. Mom had taken me shopping at the mall for a special dress, and I felt like a princess in its puffy sleeves and shiny fabric. That feeling evaporated when Brittany pointed out the synthetic material and asked loudly if we'd gotten it at one of those discount places. I didn't understand the slight then, but I felt the sting nonetheless. At 10 years old, during the annual summer gathering, I wandered through the house looking for a bathroom and overheard Aunt Diane talking to another elegantly dressed woman in the kitchen. "James is so generous, inviting his brother's family every year," she said, refilling her wine glass. "It must be good for the children to see how the other half lives. Though I sometimes wonder if it's cruel, giving the charity cases a taste of what they'll never have." The woman laughed, and I stood frozen, the word charity burning into my consciousness. I didn't fully comprehend what it meant, but I understood enough to know we were being pitted. That night, I lay awake in the guest room with its canopy bed and silk sheets, making a silent promise that someday I would never be anyone's charity case again. School became my battleground. I threw myself into studies with an intensity that sometimes worried my parents. While they encouraged education, they didn't understand my desperate need to excel, to earn every scholarship and accolade possible. By 13, I'd mapped out my entire academic future. Top grades, key extracurriculars, strategic volunteer work, all calculated to maximize my chance at a full ride to a prestigious university. Uncle James established himself as the family patriarch early on. At gatherings, everyone orbited around him, seeking approval or financial advice. He dictated where people sat, when activities would occur, and which topics were appropriate for discussion. Success in his world had one measure: wealth accumulated and displayed. My father, the younger brother who'd chosen a blue-collar life, was treated with a kind of benevolent condescension that made my blood boil even as a child. As I grew older, the family dynamics became more pronounced. Cousin Brittany evolved from a bratty child to a calculated social climber, engaged by 22 to the son of one of Uncle James's business associates. Her expressions of sympathy toward me always carried an undercurrent of superiority. Natalie, that scholarship is so impressive. It must be such a relief for your parents not having to worry about tuition. We're all just so proud of you making the best of your circumstances. Tyler developed into exactly what you'd expect, entitled, lazy, and completely unaware of his privilege. He failed upward through private schools, eventually landing a VP position at one of Uncle James's companies despite having no qualifications beyond his last name. Each family gathering became increasingly uncomfortable as the class differences grew more pronounced. By high school, I developed strategies for survival: arrive late, leave early, bring a book to escape into, and perfect the art of the polite but vague response to invasive questions about my future prospects. Uncle James never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that his generosity made these gatherings possible. Family is everything, he'd proclaim during his inevitable dinnertime speeches, champagne in hand. No matter how different our paths, we must remember blood ties us together. Some of us may have been more fortunate. At this point his gaze would invariably fall on my parents and me, but we're all Parkers in the end. The subtext was clear. There was a hierarchy in the Parker family, and we were at the bottom. But hierarchies, as I would later learn in business, are rarely as stable as they appear. Getting into MIT on a full scholarship felt like my first real victory. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and I still remember my mother's tears as she called everyone we knew. That night, my father brought home a bottle of champagne, a luxury in our household, and we toasted to possibilities. The celebration at the next family gathering was considerably more tempered. Uncle James congratulated me with a pat on the shoulder and immediately launched into a story about his golf buddy, whose son had gotten into Harvard the traditional way. The implication wasn't lost on anyone. College was a shock to my system. For the first time, I wasn't the smartest person in the room. My classmates came from prep schools with advanced courses I'd never had access to, and many had been coding since childhood while I'd taught myself on the public library computers. The first semester was brutal, long nights trying to catch up, mornings where imposter syndrome threatened to drown me, and the constant awareness that while other students could afford to fail, my scholarship depended on maintaining a certain GPA. I worked 3 part-time jobs simultaneously, shelving books at the campus library in the mornings, tutoring high school students in math on weekends, and monitoring computer labs overnight. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but the alternative, calling my parents for money they didn't have, or, worse, approaching Uncle James for a small loan, was unthinkable. It was during a particularly grueling all-nighter in the computer science building that I met Lucas Chen. He found me asleep on my keyboard at 4 a.m., a half-empty coffee cup cold beside me. Instead of walking past, he sat down and helped me debug the program I'd been fighting with for hours. By sunrise, we'd not only fixed my assignment, but discovered a shared fascination with network security vulnerabilities. Lucas became my first true friend at MIT and eventually my business partner. The son of Chinese immigrants who ran a restaurant in California, he understood my drive in a way my wealthy classmates couldn't. We spent countless hours discussing the gaps in existing cybersecurity systems and imagining solutions that hadn't been tried. The problem with current approaches, Lucas would say during our late-night coding sessions, is they're all defensive. We need to think like the attackers, but stay one step ahead. By junior year, we had outlined a business plan for what would eventually become Parker Chen Security Solutions. The vision excited us, but finding anyone to take us seriously proved nearly impossible. Venture capitalists wanted experienced teams, not 2 college kids with untested ideas. Graduation arrived with honors, but without job offers matching our ambitions. While classmates accepted 6-figure positions at established tech companies, Lucas and I moved into a dilapidated apartment in Cambridge with plumbing issues and unreliable heating. We lived on ramen noodles and determination, coding day and night to build our prototype security system. That summer coincided with cousin Brittany's lavish wedding at the Parkers' summer home in Cape Cod. I couldn't afford a proper gift or the designer outfit expected for such occasions. Instead, I wore a dress from a consignment shop and brought a handmade gift, a custom-coated digital photo frame that could pull and display images from the cloud, something not yet available commercially. The wedding was a parade of wealth and connections. Guests included state senators, CEOs, and even a minor European royal. I was seated at what was clearly the leftover table, with distant relatives no one quite remembered and the photographer's assistant. Throughout the reception, I caught glimpses of my immediate family similarly scattered at undesirable tables far from the wedding party. During the rehearsal dinner, Uncle James had everyone's attention as he gave an impromptu speech about success and family legacy. After a meandering introduction, he gestured toward me with his wine glass. Take my niece Natalie, for example, he announced to the room of strangers and acquaintances. Brilliant girl, top of her class at MIT. But a perfect example of what happens when you chase impractical dreams instead of building on solid foundations. All that education to end up unemployed and starting some internet business. He chuckled, and others joined in. Sometimes the best lessons for the young are seeing what not to do. No offense, Natalie. I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually and come work for a real company. The humiliation burned through me as heads turned and eyes filled with either pity or amusement. My parents stared at their plates, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge Uncle James in his domain. That night, in the small guest house where we'd been placed, far from the main property where important guests stayed, I made another silent vow. Not only would I succeed, but I would do it so definitively that no one in the family could ever dismiss me again. The months following Brittany's wedding were the darkest of our entrepreneurial journey. 3 potential investors backed out at the last minute. Lucas and I had a serious fight about direction that nearly ended our partnership. My student loans entered repayment, adding financial stress to an already precarious situation. I picked up bartending shifts at a local pub just to make rent while still coding 60 hours a week. There were moments I almost gave up. One particularly bad night, after receiving our 15th rejection email, I called my mother in tears. Maybe Uncle James is right, I said, sitting on our apartment fire escape to get better phone reception. Maybe I should just apply for entry-level positions at established firms. My mother's response surprised me. Normally encouraging but practical, she instead showed rare anger. Natalie Parker, you listen to me. Your uncle has spent his entire life measuring success by the wrong metrics. He has a beautiful family he barely sees, friends who are really just business connections, and a brother he treats like a failure because he chose happiness over wealth. If you want to give up because the work isn't what you thought, that's one thing. But don't you dare give up because of what James or anyone else thinks you should be doing. That conversation renewed my determination. I stopped attending family functions for a while, claiming work commitments. The truth was, I couldn't bear their questions and judgments while we were still struggling. Instead, I channeled every rejection and doubt into refining our security protocols, determined to prove them all wrong. The breakthrough happened at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, 18 months after graduation. Lucas and I had been working on an adaptive security algorithm that could predict and counter attacks by learning from patterns. We'd made progress, but kept hitting the same processing limitations. That night, exhausted and slightly delirious, I tried an approach that violated several established security principles, and it worked. Holy shit, Lucas whispered, watching the program smoothly handle simulated attacks that had previously crashed our system. Nat, do you realize what you just did? I did. We created a security protocol that could evolve faster than the threats against it, the holy grail of cybersecurity. The next morning, running on no sleep and excessive caffeine, we rewrote our business plan and started making calls. By week's end, we had meetings with 3 serious investors. By month's end, we'd secured our first round of funding, $750,000, to develop the technology for commercial applications. Our first major client came through persistence bordering on harassment. I'd identified a mid-sized financial services company with outdated security protocols as the perfect test case. After dozens of cold calls and emails went unanswered, I camped out in their corporate lobby for 2 days until the CTO agreed to a 15-minute meeting just to get rid of me. Those 15 minutes turned into 3 hours once he saw our demo, ending with a $120,000 contract to secure their systems. That first year was a blur of sleepless nights, exhilarating breakthroughs, and punishing setbacks. Lucas and I worked out of a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant, the constant smell of garlic and soy sauce permeating our clothes. We hired our first employee, a brilliant programmer named Darius, who dropped out of Stanford after developing anxiety issues. Within 6 months, we'd added 5 more team members, all brilliant misfits who'd been overlooked by larger tech companies for various reasons. The real turning point came 18 months in, when our security system prevented a major attack on one of our clients' databases. The incident made technology news, bringing attention from larger companies. Suddenly, we weren't chasing meetings, we were turning down clients to maintain quality control. A major tech conglomerate approached us with an acquisition offer, $30 million to absorb our technology and team. The figure was staggering enough to make every financial worry disappear forever. Lucas was understandably tempted. We spent a week debating, calculating, and imagining futures where we were suddenly, undeniably wealthy. In the end, I convinced him to refuse. If they're offering $30 million now, when we're just getting started, imagine what we'll be worth if we maintain independence and keep developing our technology, I argued. Besides, do you really want to be reporting to some corporate board that doesn't understand what we've built? The decision to stay independent proved pivotal. Within another year, Parkerton Security Solutions was valued at over $100 million. We moved into legitimate office space in a Cambridge high-rise, with a team that had grown to over 50 people. Industry awards and recognition followed, though I deliberately kept a low profile in the press. The less my family knew about my success, the better. I wanted the revelation to come on my terms. Despite my growing wealth, I maintained relatively modest personal spending habits. My apartment, while in an upscale building, wasn't ostentatious. I drove a practical luxury car rather than something flashy. The one exception was flying lessons. I discovered an unexpected passion for aviation and spent weekends learning to pilot increasingly sophisticated aircraft. Something about the freedom of flight, the technical precision required, and honestly, the ability to literally rise above everything appealed to me on a profound level. As our company grew, so did my strategic vision. We began acquiring minority stakes in complementary security firms, building a network of allied technologies. I studied business tactics with the same intensity I'd once applied to coding, becoming as fluent in corporate acquisitions as I was in programming languages. When the opportunity arose to purchase a Bell 429 helicopter, I justified it as both a business tool and personal indulgence. The sleek, twin-engine aircraft could transport me between meetings across the Northeast much faster than commercial flights, and the company could certainly afford it. But the truth was simpler. I wanted it. The little girl who'd been made to feel small in her uncle's mansion now had the means to arrive from the sky if she chose. By the 5-year mark of our company's existence, Parkerton Security Solutions had become an industry leader with a valuation approaching 9 figures. Lucas handled the technological innovation while I focused on business strategy and growth. We'd expanded internationally, with offices in London, Singapore, and Toronto. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and financial institutions. Through it all, I maintained the fiction of modest success with my family. At the occasional gathering I couldn't avoid, I'd speak vaguely about the business doing well, but deflect specific questions. I drove my practical Audi to family functions, wore understated clothing, albeit now from designers, and never corrected their assumptions that I was doing fine, but certainly not exceptional. Uncle James continued his condescension, though with slightly less overt dismissal. The tech bubble hasn't burst for you yet? Good for you, keeping that little business afloat. He'd moved on to comparing me unfavorably to cousin Tyler, who'd recently been promoted to executive VP at the family company despite a string of costly mistakes. As the annual summer gathering approached that 5th year, I made a decision. It was time to end the charade. I'd attended enough events as the family's charity case. This year would be different. This year, I would arrive as myself, Natalie Parker, CEO of a company worth more than everything Uncle James had built in his lifetime. The plan was simple but theatrical. I would drive to the gathering as usual, maintain the act through dinner, and then, when the timing was perfect, my pilot would arrive with the helicopter to urgently transport me to an important business meeting. The revelation would be impossible to dismiss or minimize. Was it petty? Perhaps. Calculated for maximum impact? Absolutely. But after years of subtle humiliation and dismissal, I felt entitled to one moment of perfectly orchestrated vindication. Uncle James's estate looked exactly as it always had, imposing, meticulously maintained, and designed to broadcast wealth and status to anyone approaching. I deliberately arrived in my Audi rather than the new Porsche I'd recently purchased, parking far down the circular driveway among the less impressive vehicles. Some habits of self-preservation die hard. The property sprawled across 4 manicured acres, the main house a 7-bedroom Tudor revival with numerous architectural flourishes that served no purpose beyond ostentation. Stone paths wound through English gardens where a team of landscapers maintained year-round perfection. A tennis court, recently resurfaced, sat adjacent to the pool house, which was larger than my childhood home. Aunt Diane greeted me at the door with her customary air kisses, hovering near my cheeks without making actual contact. Natalie, darling, we weren't sure you'd make it this year. You're always so busy with your computer things. Her smile remained fixed as her eyes catalogued my appearance, clearly trying to estimate the cost of my understated outfit. I wouldn't miss it, I replied with practiced warmth. Family traditions are important. The foyer opened to a great room where various relatives had already gathered. Cousin Brittany stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on her protruding belly, her second pregnancy, while the other clutched a glass of sparkling water. Her husband Gregory, a hedge fund manager with an expression of perpetual mild confusion, nodded along to whatever story Uncle James was telling. Natalie, Brittany called out, waving me over. Come feel the baby kick. He's going to be a soccer player, I swear. I obliged, placing my hand briefly on her stomach while she launched into details about the nursery renovation that had cost an absolute fortune, but was worth every penny for little Hudson's comfort. That's wonderful, I said. You look amazing. Thanks. We just got back from Monaco. Gregory's firm closed a huge deal, so we celebrated with 2 weeks on a yacht. She fingered the diamond pendant at her throat. This was my push present for baby number 2. Gregory knows how much I love Cartier. Before I could respond, cousin Tyler appeared with a fresh drink in hand, already showing signs of having started the celebration early. Hey, if it isn't the computer geek. Still playing with websites or whatever. I smiled tightly. Cybersecurity, Tyler. And yes, the company's doing well. Cool. Hey, check this out. He pulled out his phone to show me pictures of a bright red sports car. Just picked it up last week. 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. Cost more than your annual salary, I bet. He laughed at his own joke. It's very red, I offered, which he seemed to take as the compliment he was fishing for. Aunt Diane orchestrated pre-dinner drinks on the terrace overlooking the garden. I found myself cornered by her and 2 of her friends from the country club, women with identical highlights and tennis bracelets who seemed to communicate in a shorthand of subtle judgments. Natalie has her own business, Aunt Diane explained to her friends. Isn't that brave in today's economy? Not everyone needs the security of a proper corporate position or family connections. She patted my arm. We've always admired how you've carved out your modest life on your own terms. That's one way to put it, I replied, taking a deliberate sip of champagne. And are you seeing anyone special? One of the friends inquired, her expression suggesting she already knew the answer was no. I've been focused on work, I said simply. It doesn't leave much time for dating. Oh, but you must make time, Aunt Diane insisted. Women in business often wake up at 40 and realize they've missed their window for family. Not that there's anything wrong with being career-focused, of course. The qualifier didn't match her concerned expression. Dinner was announced, saving me from further interrogation. The formal dining room could seat 24 at the mahogany table that had reportedly once belonged to a minor European royal. The place settings featured the family china and crystal, with elaborate floral arrangements, creating a strategic barrier to cross-table conversation. As expected, I was seated at the far end, between an elderly great-uncle who was hard of hearing and one of Tyler's forgettable friends. Uncle James stood at the head of the table, commanding attention with a gentle tap of his knife against crystal. Before we begin, I want to welcome everyone to our annual summer gathering. The Parker family has much to celebrate this year. What followed was his traditional rundown of family accomplishments, a ceremony designed to reinforce the hierarchy he'd established. Brittany's pregnancy and her husband's promotion. Tyler's executive position and new sports car. Various cousins' engagements, home purchases, and vacation properties. Each announcement met with appropriate oohs and ahs from the assembled family. And Natalie, he finally said, his tone shifting slightly, continues with her computer business. We're all very proud of her independence. The faint praise hung in the air, followed by a beat of awkward silence before he quickly moved on to blessing the meal. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed around me more than to me. I answered the occasional polite inquiry about my work with intentionally vague responses. Business is steady. We're exploring some new opportunities. The tech sector has its ups and downs. As dessert was served, Uncle James steered the conversation to his latest business acquisition, a regional security services company with government contracts. The deal closed last week. $30 million, all cash. They practically begged me to take it off their hands. Brilliant move, James, one of his golf buddies commented. That sector is only going to grow. Security is certainly a growth industry, I offered mildly. Tyler snorted. What would you know about acquisitions, Nat? Isn't your company still just you and your college buddy in some shared office space? Several people chuckled, including Uncle James. Now, Tyler, be nice. Natalie's operation is boutique. Not everyone wants the pressure of real expansion. I took a small bite of chocolate torte, letting the moment stretch. Actually, I began, but Uncle James was already talking over me, describing his plans to restructure the acquired company. The previous owner had no vision, he proclaimed. Typical founder mentality, too attached to their original ideas. Sometimes these tech types need to be saved from themselves. Isn't that the truth? Aunt Diane agreed. They get so caught up in their little projects they can't see the bigger financial picture. Something in me snapped. 5 years of calculated patience crumbled in an instant. Speaking of finances, I said, just loudly enough to cut through the conversation, did anyone else notice the market shift in tech securities last quarter? The valuation multiples were fascinating. The table went quiet, surprise registering on several faces that I'd introduced a substantive business topic. Uncle James recovered first. I doubt most people here follow market indicators that closely, Natalie. His tone suggested neither did I. That's fair, I conceded. It's probably only relevant to those of us actively managing 9-figure investments. Cousin Brittany laughed nervously. Good one, Nat, 9 figures. Can you imagine? Speaking of figures, Uncle James smoothly redirected, Natalie, your parents mentioned you might be looking to make some changes career-wise. If you're interested, I could find something entry-level at one of my companies. The benefits would be better than what you can offer yourself at your startup. The table grew uncomfortably quiet. Even those who normally enjoyed my humiliation seemed embarrassed by the directness of the offer. That's very generous, I replied evenly, but I'm satisfied with my current position. Of course. Just an offer to consider. He smiled magnanimously. Family should help family. Not everyone can be successful in business. It requires a certain instinct. But there's no shame in recognizing when it's time to join the real corporate world. Several relatives nodded in agreement. Cousin Tyler, emboldened by alcohol and his father's example, added, "Yeah, we should start a charity fund for Natalie. The Help a Techie Foundation." He laughed at his own joke, joined by a few others. I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "If you'll excuse me for a moment." As I walked away, I heard Aunt Diane stage whisper, "Poor thing. James was only trying to help." In the privacy of the garden, I sent a text message containing just one word, "Now." I returned to the dining room with a renewed sense of calm, taking my seat as Uncle James was describing his plans for a new vacation property in Aspen. "We've secured an exclusive plot near the top chair lift," he was saying. "The architect who designed Kevin Costner's place is drawing up the plans. 8 bedrooms, indoor pool, the works." "Sounds lovely," I commented. I've always enjoyed Aspen, though I prefer Telluride for the quieter atmosphere. "You've been to Telluride?" Aunt Diane asked, surprise evident in her tone. "When was this?" "Last winter," I said casually. "Just a quick ski weekend." "On a tech startup salary?" "Good for you. Splurging a little," she replied with what she probably thought was encouragement. Uncle James continued his story about the Aspen property, detailing the millions being invested in custom features. I ate my dessert in silence, checking my watch occasionally. The best part about the acquisition, Uncle James was now saying, returning to his business triumph, is that I personally know the CEO of TechSafe Systems, who tried to outbid me. Martin Wayland. We play golf at the same club. "Martin's an interesting character," I remarked. "Very traditional in his approach to business." Uncle James paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "You know Martin Wayland?" "We've crossed paths at industry events," I said vaguely. "He's not particularly forward-thinking when it comes to advanced security protocols." "Well, he's built a $100 million company, so he must be doing something right," Uncle James countered, clearly annoyed that I'd claimed a connection to someone in his circle. $100 million? Is that what he told you it's worth?" I smiled slightly. "That's generous." The conversation might have continued in this vein, but a distant sound interrupted. The distinctive whump-whump-whump of helicopter blades cutting through the air. "What on earth?" Aunt Diane stood, peering out the dining room windows. "James, did you arrange for a helicopter?" Uncle James frowned. "Of course not. It must be heading to the hospital helipad." But the sound grew louder, clearly approaching the property. Conversation halted as the noise became impossible to ignore. Several family members moved to the windows, watching as a sleek black helicopter appeared over the tree line. "It's coming here," someone said unnecessarily as the aircraft began descending toward the expansive lawn. Confusion turned to chaos as relatives rushed from the dining room onto the terrace for a better view. The Bell 429 touched down gracefully on the grass, its rotors slowing but not stopping completely. Who would have the audacity? Uncle James began, his face flushed with anger as he strode onto the lawn. "This is private property." A man in a pilot's uniform emerged from the helicopter and walked calmly toward the gathering on the terrace. He was professionally dressed in a black uniform with subtle insignia on the breast pocket. "I apologize for the interruption," he called over the noise of the idling engine. "I'm looking for Miss Parker." All eyes turned to me. "That would be me," I said, stepping forward. The pilot nodded respectfully. "Miss Parker, I apologize for the delay. There was unexpected air traffic over Boston. The jet is fueled and waiting at the private terminal." Uncle James stepped between us. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just land a helicopter on my property without permission." "I apologize for any inconvenience, sir," the pilot replied with practiced courtesy. "I'm following Miss Parker's instructions." "My instructions?" Uncle James looked confused. "Not yours," the pilot clarified. "Natalie Parker's instructions." All eyes swiveled back to me. "Thank you, Michael," I said to the pilot. "I'll be ready in a few minutes." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle idling of the helicopter engine. "Natalie," Uncle James finally managed, "what is going on? Why is there a helicopter here for you?" I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The moment I'd imagined for years had arrived. "It's my helicopter, Uncle James. I need to be in New York for an early meeting tomorrow. Your helicopter? Aunt Diane repeated, her voice rising an octave. That's not possible. I assure you it is, I replied. Parkerton Security Solutions maintains a small fleet for executive transport. This one is my personal aircraft. Parkerton, that little startup you and your friend run? Tyler asked, confusion evident on his face. That little startup currently provides cybersecurity for 60% of the Fortune 100 companies, 3 major government agencies, and the top 8 financial institutions in the world, I said evenly. We're not publicly traded, which is why you wouldn't see us in the standard financial news, but our last valuation put us just over $2 billion. The stunned silence that followed was worth every moment of restraint I'd practiced over the years. 2 billion? Uncle James repeated, his face draining of color. Give or take a few $100 million, depending on market conditions, I confirmed. Lucas and I have maintained majority ownership through all funding rounds. I currently hold 38% of the company. Brittany's hand flew to her mouth. That would make you worth nearly $800 million on paper, I finished for her. Though liquidity is always a consideration with privately held assets. The family stood frozen, processing this information against the backdrop of years of assumptions. That's wonderful, Natalie, Uncle James finally said, his voice strained as he attempted to pivot. I always knew you had potential. Your drive reminds me of myself at your age. Does it? I asked. I don't recall you ever expressing that confidence before. Well, perhaps not directly, but... He fumbled. I removed a slim folder from my purse and handed it to him. Speaking of potential, you might find this interesting. It's regarding TruShield Securities. He frowned, taking the folder. The company I just acquired? What about it? Parkerton Security Solutions purchased a controlling interest in TruShield last month through a series of shell companies. We kept our involvement quiet to avoid driving up the purchase price. I paused, letting him process this. You now own 26% of a company that is 62% owned by my firm. Essentially, Uncle James, you report to me in that particular corporate structure. He opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the documents that confirmed everything I'd just stated. This is impossible, he whispered. I would have known. Would you? I asked gently. You've spent the past 5 years dismissing my business as a little computer project. It never occurred to you to research what we actually do or what market position we hold. Tyler stepped forward, his earlier mockery replaced with an ingratiating smile. Nat, this is amazing. You should have told us. We're family after all. Yes, I agreed. We are family. The same family that seated me at the far end of the table for 2 decades. The same family that referred to my parents as the charity cases. The same family that offered me an entry-level position out of pity 10 minutes ago. No one had a response to that. The silence stretched uncomfortably as my relatives processed this dramatic reversal of fortune. Uncle James was the first to recover, slipping into the smooth, confident persona that had served him well in business for decades. Natalie, clearly there's been a misunderstanding, he began, handing the folder to his wife without looking at her. When I offered you a position earlier, it was merely because I hadn't realized how successful you'd become. You've kept your achievements so quiet. Perhaps too quiet among family. Have I? I asked mildly. Or did you simply never ask genuine questions about my life and work? Now, that's not entirely fair, he countered, forcing a laugh. Family gatherings aren't business meetings. We discuss personal matters. Like Tyler's new sports car and Brittany's vacation homes? Those seem to merit detailed discussion. My cousins had the grace to look uncomfortable. Brittany stepped forward, her expression newly calculating. We've always believed in you, Natalie, she insisted, resting her hand protectively over her pregnant belly as if it might shield her from accountability. Remember when you were applying to colleges and I helped you with those essays? You offered to proofread them and then told everyone at dinner they were cute but naive, I reminded her. And last Christmas, you suggested I consider community college teaching as a fallback when the tech bubble bursts. Tyler, ever the opportunist, tried a different approach. This is incredible, Nat. We should talk about potential synergies between our companies. I've been developing a new division at Parker Industries that could dovetail perfectly with your security solutions. You mean the division that lost $12 million last quarter due to outdated product development strategies? I asked. Several heads turned toward Tyler in surprise. Apparently, that particular detail hadn't been shared at family gatherings. How did you? He began, then stopped himself. Aunt Diane intervened, her social skills kicking into high gear. What matters is that we're all tremendously proud of you now, Natalie. We always knew you were special. She glanced at my helicopter and back. We simply had no idea of the scale of your success. You've been so modest. I haven't been modest, I corrected her. I've been private. There's a difference. Other relatives began crowding around, suddenly discovering urgent reasons to reconnect with their previously overlooked cousin. Second cousins who'd never spoken more than 2 sentences to me were claiming long-standing admiration. Aunts who'd whispered about my second-hand clothes were complimenting my refreshingly understated style. Uncle James seized a momentary lull to raise his voice. I think this calls for a toast. Marcus, bring the special champagne from the cellar. The Krug Klaus du Mesnil. He turned to the assembled family with the air of a man regaining control of the narrative. Natalie's success is the family's success. The Parkers have always been achievers. I appreciate the sentiment, I said, but I don't have time for champagne. My pilot is waiting, and I have early meetings in New York. Surely you can delay a few minutes to celebrate with family, Uncle James insisted, an edge creeping into his voice. The subtext was clear. He needed this performance to save face. Actually, I'd like a word with you in private before I go, I told him. Perhaps on the terrace? He nodded stiffly, and we stepped away from the group. The evening air was cool, the garden lights casting long shadows across the manicured lawn where my helicopter waited. Natalie, he began once we were alone. I hope you understand that any misunderstandings between us over the years were never personal. Business is business, and family is family. That's precisely the problem, Uncle James. You treated family like a business hierarchy with yourself at the top. Every gathering, every interaction was designed to reinforce your position and diminish others who didn't meet your standards of success. He frowned. That's a harsh interpretation of family traditions. Is it? When I was 10 years old, I overheard Aunt Diane call my parents the charity cases. At Brittany's wedding, you used me as an example of what not to do in front of 100 guests. Last Thanksgiving, you suggested I consider selling insurance when my computer hobby inevitably failed. People say things they don't mean. No, I interrupted firmly. People say things they absolutely mean, but later regret when circumstances change. You meant every dismissive comment, every backhanded compliment, every time you seated us at the far end of the table. You meant it all because you genuinely believed we were beneath you. He didn't immediately deny it, which was perhaps the most honest he'd been with me in years. What do you want, Natalie? He finally asked. If this is about True Shield, this isn't about business, I clarified. Though since you mentioned it, I'll be implementing significant changes at True Shield. The existing management has been exploiting workers and cutting corners on data protection. The profit margins you were promised were built on unsustainable practices. You can't just, I can and will. My first priority will be raising the salary floor for all employees to ensure living wages. My second will be implementing our top-tier security protocols, even if it temporarily impacts short-term profits. My third will be establishing an ethics committee with actual enforcement capability. He stared at me, recognition dawning that this wasn't just personal. I genuinely had the power to remake his acquisition in my company's image. As for what I want personally, I continued, it's simple. Respect. Not because I'm now wealthier than you, though I am, but because I'm family. The same respect you should have shown my parents all these years. The same respect every person deserves regardless of their net worth. And if I refuse, he asked quietly, then this will be my last family gathering, I said simply. I didn't build my company to spite you, Uncle James. I built it because I believed in what Lucas and I created. But I won't continue subjecting myself or my parents to an environment where our worth as people is measured by our financial statements. He was silent for a long moment, looking out over the property that had been the center of family power dynamics for decades. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its characteristic authority. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been all these years. You could start by listening instead of judging," I suggested. "You've spent so long being the family success story that you never bothered to learn who any of us actually are beyond our economic utility to you." Our conversation was interrupted by Tyler, who approached with barely concealed impatience. "Dad, everyone's waiting for you to start the toast." "And Nat, I really think we should discuss potential business alignments before you go. My division has some innovative concepts that would pair perfectly with your security protocols." I regarded my cousin thoughtfully. "Tyler, when was the last time you worked a weekend?" He blinked in surprise. "What? A weekend? Saturday and Sunday. When did you last work through one?" "I mean, we all need work-life balance. That's just good management." "I've worked every weekend for the past 6 years," I told him. Before our second round of funding, Lucas and I slept in our office for 3 months straight to conserve cash. Our lead developer coded with a fever of 103 to meet a critical deadline. That's what building something from nothing actually requires. He had no response, his expression suggesting these concepts were entirely foreign to him. "I need to go," I said, checking my watch. "Michael has filed a flight plan, and we need to maintain our departure window." I turned back to Uncle James. "Think about what I said. Real change will require more than just a toast with expensive champagne." As I walked toward the helicopter, a voice called out behind me. "Natalie, wait." I turned to see my cousin Emma, Uncle James's youngest daughter. Unlike her siblings, Emma had always been kind, if distant. At 24, she'd recently graduated from university and seemed uncomfortable with the family's materialistic values. "I just wanted to say, that was amazing," she said, slightly breathless from running after me. "Not the helicopter or the money, but standing up to everyone. I've wanted to do that for years." I smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. It took me a long time to find the courage. "Would you?" She hesitated. "Would you be willing to get coffee sometime?" "I'm trying to figure out my own path, and I'd love to hear how you found yours." I studied her face, finding no calculation or ulterior motive, just genuine interest. "I'd like that," I said, pulling out a business card. "Call my office next week." "I'll make time." "Really? Thank you." Her excitement was palpable and refreshingly sincere. As I boarded the helicopter, I caught a final glimpse of my family gathered on the terrace. Uncle James standing slightly apart, still holding the folder I'd given him, his expression unreadable. Aunt Diane gesturing animatedly to her friends, likely already spinning the narrative to her advantage. Cousins on phones, perhaps Googling me and my company for the first time. The rotors spun faster, and we lifted smoothly into the evening sky, the mansion and its occupants growing smaller below us. The vindication I'd anticipated for years felt different than expected. Less triumphant gloating, more quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Whether a new, healthier one would begin remained to be seen. 1 month later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment, watching a summer storm roll across the Boston skyline. The space was modern and elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable luxury rather than showy extravagance. It reflected who I'd become, someone who appreciated quality and beauty but didn't need to broadcast wealth to feel secure in it. The revelation at Uncle James's gathering had rippled through the family in unexpected ways. Some relatives had doubled down on ingratiation, sending expensive gifts and effusive messages about how proud they'd always been of me. Others had retreated into resentful silence. A few, surprisingly, had reached out with what seemed like genuine interest in reconnecting on more authentic terms. Uncle James himself had sent a handwritten letter, not an email or text, but an actual letter on heavyweight stationery, acknowledging that he'd treated my parents and me unfairly for years. While stopping short of a full apology, it represented more reflection than I'd thought him capable of. The last paragraph mentioned that he was implementing some of my suggested changes at TrueShield, finding that employee morale had improved significantly. Whether this represented genuine growth or strategic adaptation to new power dynamics remained unclear. The vindication I'd imagined for so long had proven hollow in many ways. Yes, there had been satisfaction in the shocked expressions, the sudden respect, the reversal of fortune. But it hadn't healed the wounds of decades of dismissal and condescension. Those would take more than a dramatic helicopter landing to resolve. What had proven unexpectedly meaningful was my coffee meeting with cousin Emma. Unlike the rest of the family, she'd wanted to understand the journey rather than just the destination. We talked for 3 hours about perseverance, finding purpose beyond material success, and the courage to defy expectations. I'd found myself sharing struggles and doubts I rarely voiced, even to Lucas. At the end of our conversation, I'd offered her an internship in our marketing department, with the clear understanding that she would receive no special treatment beyond the initial opportunity. "I don't want a shortcut," she'd said firmly. "I want to learn how to build something meaningful." That single authentic connection had provided more healing than the dramatic revelation to the entire family. My parents had been another source of unexpected perspective. When I'd finally told them the full extent of my success, something I downplayed even with them to avoid complicating their relationship with Uncle James, my father had laughed. "We knew something big was happening," he admitted. "You think we didn't notice you trying to give us small gifts that cost more than our mortgage? We Googled you years ago, kiddo. Why didn't you say anything?" I'd asked, stunned. "It was your story to tell when you were ready," my mother explained. Though I admit, the helicopter was a bit much. Her eyes had twinkled with amusement. I'd used part of my wealth to buy them a comfortable home in a seaside community they'd always loved. Not a mansion or anything ostentatious, but a place where my father could retire from the mechanic shop and my mother could quit the secretary job that had grown increasingly demanding. They'd accepted this gift, but had firmly rejected my offer of a much larger trust fund. "We're proud of you beyond words," my father had said, "but we don't need to be rich. We just need enough to be comfortable and to know you're happy." Their contentment with a life that Uncle James had always deemed insufficient was perhaps the most powerful lesson in all of this. The most profound changes had come in my own perspective. The company continued to thrive, but I'd found myself delegating more, trusting my exceptional team to maintain our trajectory while I focused on long-term vision and innovation. Lucas had taken a month-long sabbatical, his first real break in 6 years, and returned with renewed creativity and enthusiasm. I'd established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in technology, with particular focus on young women from backgrounds similar to mine. The first cohort of 20 scholars would begin their computer science degrees in the fall, each with full tuition and mentorship from our company's top minds. My relationship with wealth had evolved. The initial rush of being able to buy anything had given way to more thoughtful consideration of what actually brought fulfillment. Yes, the helicopter remained. I genuinely loved flying, but I'd found that experiences and connections provided far more satisfaction than accumulating possessions. I'd even begun dating again, meeting Alexander at a technology ethics conference where we'd both been speakers. As the CEO of a sustainable energy startup, he understood the demands of building something meaningful and didn't measure success solely in financial terms. Our relationship was still new, but based on mutual respect and shared values rather than what either of us had accumulated. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the skyline in brilliant flashes. My phone chimed with a message from Emma, sharing her excitement about a marketing strategy she developed for one of our smaller clients. Her natural creativity, freed from Uncle James's narrow definition of success, was flourishing in ways that reminded me of my own early passion. The truth I'd come to understand was that true wealth had little to do with helicopters or penthouse apartments. It lay in the freedom to define success on my own terms, to create something meaningful that outlasted quarterly profit reports, and to build connections based on authentic appreciation rather than utility or advantage. Had I needed the dramatic helicopter landing to make my point? Perhaps not. It had been theatrical and perhaps even petty. But after years of diminishment, perhaps that moment of undeniable achievement had been necessary, not for my family, but for me. A final, definitive closing of one chapter before beginning another based on self-defined worth rather than external validation. The company would continue to grow. Some family relationships would heal while others might remain permanently distant. The future would bring new challenges requiring innovation and resilience. But the frightened, insecure girl who had once overheard herself being called a charity case had finally found peace, not through revenge or vindication, but through the realization that she had always been enough, regardless of anyone else's assessment. I turned from the window as lightning flashed again, illuminating the space I'd created for myself through years of determination and vision. The storm would pass, as all storms eventually do. And when it did, I would still be here. Standing in my truth, comfortable in my worth, and focused not on proving anything to anyone, but on building something that mattered. What about you? Have you ever had to prove your worth to family members who underestimated you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of vindication and finding your own path resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of overcoming obstacles and finding success on your own terms. Remember, true wealth isn't measured by helicopters or bank accounts. It's measured by the impact you make and the authentic connections you build along the way. Until next time, this is Natalie Parker, signing off and wishing you the courage to define success on your own terms.